criteria by which one can evaluate one's own spiritual advancement, and one can also understand where others are positioned. So one of the objective criteria that the Bhagavad Gita gives us is this concept of the three modes of material nature. There is nothing like this in any of the world's religion. You take any religion for that matter, you won't find these kind of very objective parameters to evaluate where a particular person stands. So this analytical classification of the material world and the people within it based on an objective universal criteria. This is a very unique revelation of Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic theology actually. So all religions classify people between believers and non-believers. Both Christianity and Islam would say that if you believe that Jesus is the only way, or Muhammad is the only way, then you are delivered. And if you don't believe, then you are going to go to hell forever. So, but Bhagavad Gita doesn't speak like that. It doesn't say that only Krishna devotees are going to be delivered and everybody else will be going to hell. No. The Bhagavad Gita says that there are qualities which not only determines but also expresses one's consciousness. So what determines one's consciousness is not just the so-called claim of faith. Now anybody can say that I believe in Krishna, I believe in Jesus, I believe in Muhammad. Even in the Bible it is said, you shall be known not by your words but by your works. What exactly is your life? That is what determines eventually. So our consciousness is expressed through our qualities and our behavior. And we will go back to Godhead when we have developed a divine consciousness. And how we will develop a divine consciousness is not just a sentiment. Where just one day I'll just wake up and then I'll say, no, today I have developed love for Krishna. No, it will happen gradually. And it will happen gradually if we follow the process. So there is a process along the process, there are landmarks. Now the three modes talk about more or less material landmarks. So when we talk about Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu given by Rupa Goswami and elaborated by Jiva Goswami in his Durgam Sangamani Tika, so there the 9 stages of devotional service are described. So the way it is mentioned is where we will achieve Krishna Prem. So excuse me. So there is a process that is given. There are 9 stages. And then it concludes by saying that at the end, if we follow this path, at the end, we'll achieve the Krishna Prem, So in this chapter, Krishna talks about the 3 modes of material nature. That means how someone's situated in the material nature, what is his situation? Now, how can we understand that? And what is that determines his situation? So that is what these modes describe. So throughout the chapter, Krishna is going to talk about these 3 modes of material nature. So let's discuss. Let's first read the first verse, and then we can discuss more about it. So I'm going to share my screen and let me know when you're able to see my screen. Okay, is my screen visible?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay, so you can repeat after me. Shri Bhagwan Uvacha.
Shri Bhagwan Uvacha.
Param bhuyah pravakshyami.
Param bhuyah pravakshami.
Jnananam jnanamuttamam.
Jnananam
Yagyatva munaya sarve.
Yagyatva munaya sarve.
Param siddhimito gataha.
Param siddhimito gataha.
Shri Bhagwan Uvacha.
Shri Bhagwan Uvacha.
Param bhuyah pravakshyami.
Param bhuyah pravakshami.
Jnananam jnanamuttamam.
Jnananam jnanamuttamam.
Yagyatva munaya sarve.
Yagyatva munaya sarve.
Param siddhimito gataha.
Param siddhimito gataha.
Param bhuyah pravakshami.
Param bhuyah pravakshami.
Jnananam jnanamuttamam.
ज्ञानानं ज्ञानमुत्तमम्
यज्ञात्वा मुनयः सर्वे
यज्ञात्वा मुनयः सर्वे
सर्वे
परां सिद्धिं मितो गतः.
परां
परां
सिद्धिमितो गताः.
सिद्धिमितो गतः.
Anyone else would like to recite the verse?
Okay, I will do it.
Oh, go ahead.
परं
Good.
यः प्रवक्ष्यामि
Param
Param
bhuya
bhuyah
pravakshami
pravakshami
ज्ञानानं ज्ञानमुत्तमम्
jnanam jnanamuttamam
jnanam
यज्ञात्वा मुनयः सर्वे
yajñātvā munaya sarve
सिद्धिमितो गतः.
param
param
siddhim mito
siddhimito
gataha.
gataha.
Anyone else would like to recite?
Shri Bhagavan Vacha
Shri Bhagwan Uvacha
Param bhuya pravakshami
प्रवक्ष्यामि
Param bhuyah pravakshami
jnananam jnanamuttamam
jnananam jnanamuttamam
yajñātvā munaya sarve
yajñātvā
यज्ञात्वा
munaya
मुनयः
sarve
सर्वे
param siddhimito gataha.
param
परां
siddhim mito
सिद्धिमितो
gataha.
गतः.
Anyone else would like to recite?
Shri Bhagavan Vacha
Shri
Shri
Bhagwan
Bhagavan
Uvacha
Vacha
Param Pura Pravakshate
param bhuya
Param bhuyah pravakshami
Yami Jinam Jinam Umantamam
jnananam
jnananam
jnanamuttamam
ज्ञानमुत्तमम्
Jaja Janam Save
yajñātvā
yajñātvā
munaya sarve
sarve
Param Siddham Igachata.
param siddhim mito gataha.
gataha.
Anyone else? Okay, so if no one wants to recite, let's recite the synonyms. You can repeat after me. Shri Bhagwan Uvacha,
Shri Bhagavan
भगवान्
Vacha
उवाच
the Supreme Personality of Godhead said,
the Supreme Personality of Godhead said
God had said
Param,
Param
param
परम
transcendental,
Transcendental
transcendental
Bhuyaha,
Bhuya
भूयः
again,
again
again
Pravakshyami,
प्रवक्ष्यामि
I shall speak,
I shall
I
speak
shall
I shall
speak
speak
Jnananam,
jnana
ज्ञानानाम्
of all knowledge,
of all
of all
knowledge.
knowledge
Jnanam,
Jnanam,
ज्ञानं
knowledge,
knowledge.
knowledge
Uttamam,
Uttamam,
उत्तमं
the Supreme,
the
the
Supreme.
Supreme
Yat,
yat
यत्
which,
That
which
which
Gyatva,
Yeah,
gyatva
ज्ञात्वा
knowing,
knowing
knowing
knowing.
Munaya,
munaya
मुनयः
the sages,
the sages
Sarve,
survey
सर्वे
all,
Oh,
all
Param,
Param,
परां
transcendental,
transcendental.
transcendental
Siddhim,
siddhim
सिद्धिं
perfection,
Perfection.
perfection
Itaha,
itaha
ततः
from this world,
From this
from
world.
this
from this
world
world
Gataha,
गतः
attained.
it
attain
Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, Again, I shall declare to you this supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained the supreme perfection. Purport. From the 7th chapter to the end of the 12th chapter, Sri Krishna in detail reveals the absolute truth, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Now, the Lord Himself is further enlightening Arjuna. If one understands this chapter through the process of philosophical speculation, he will come to an understanding of devotional service. In the 13th chapter, it was clearly explained that by humbly developing knowledge, one may possibly be freed from material entanglement. It has also been explained that it is due to association with the modes of nature that the living entity is entangled in this material world. Now, in this chapter, the Supreme Personality explains what those modes of nature are, how they act, how they bind, and how they give liberation. The knowledge explained in this chapter is proclaimed by the Supreme Lord to be superior to the knowledge given so far in other chapters. By understanding this knowledge, various great sages attained perfection and transferred to the spiritual world. The Lord now explains the same knowledge in a better way. This knowledge is far, far superior to all other processes of knowledge, thus far explained. And knowing this, many attained perfection. Thus, it is expected that one who understands this 14th chapter will attain perfection. So it's a very categorical statement. If we clearly understand this 14th chapter, then the person will actually attain perfection. Now, just a question: how did everyone find the 13th chapter? We just completed it last week, and we had a quiz also yesterday. I'm sorry, day before yesterday on the 13th chapter. So, how did everyone find the 13th chapter? Any comments about that? Okay. Nobody has any comments?
No, we learned about, kshetra, kshetrajna, how about the body and the knower of the body, and all the different elements and superior and inferior nature and all that. So it was clear. That
actually, 13th chapter is, at least I felt that it is the most technical chapter in the whole Bhagavad Gita.
It is very technical.
So the whole, actually in the Jnana section, all the chapters are very technical, but still we'll see that the other chapters are not so technical. A lot of technical terms, and the way it is described by Krishna, these, Kshetra, for example, we can just call it as body. Why do you have to use very technical terms? So, Kshetragya is the soul, and in other chapters, Krishna has been using the word Jiva and soul. But again, Arjuna had asked those questions because these are the terms that are branded around by the Gyanis. So he wanted to understand clearly from Krishna, what these terms mean, and is it any different from the way the other words like soul and the body are used in a general sense. So obviously, because Krishna asked those terms and he wanted Krishna to clarify, therefore Krishna clarifies. But again, it's a very technical chapter, 13th chapter. So we successfully completed that, which is good news, because many people, they find it very, very, very complex and difficult to understand and comprehend. So if you remember, in the 13th chapter, Krishna answered 6 questions of Arjuna. So Kshetra, Kshetragya, Jnanam, Gyayam, and Purusha and Prakriti. And he concluded with Jnana Chakshu, how it all can fit together. So that is the conclusion. So the last section of the 13th chapter, verses 26 to 35, is basically not an analysis, it is a darshan. Everybody is able to hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Prabhuji.
So because I got a message here about that my connection is weak. Okay, so the verses 26 to 35 in the last chapter, they're basically not an analysis, it is a darshan. So the word darshan in English, it is roughly translated as philosophy. Now, there are a lot of words in English language, there are a lot of words in the Sanskrit language which do not have like a, a equivalent word in the English language. So, but we can use some indicative or very close words that, signifies, at least to a certain extent, signifies the same meaning. So the word darshan, it can be roughly translated as philosophy, but it is actually much more than a philosophy. It actually means a realized perspective. That's why it is called as, it's called a darshan. Like when we see the Lord's vigraha, we call it as darshan. So similarly, darshan means when one sees and one explains. So in spirituality, whenever the scriptures are written by the acharyas write their smriti shastras, or whenever the scriptural knowledge is given, actually that knowledge originates from experience and perception. So for example, Rupa Goswami is seeing the pastimes of Krishna, which are being described in Lalit Madhav. So in spirituality, especially at the foundational moments, what it begins with is experience. And in general, spiritual experience is beyond words and even material concepts. So in this world, when we communicate with each other, there are 3 steps. First, we have some concepts in our minds. We put those concepts in words, and then we communicate that to others. So in general, whenever something is to be understood, there are these 2 things. There are the words to communicate, and there are concepts to explain. So spiritual knowledge in general, especially in terms of spiritual experience or vision, is beyond material words and beyond material concepts also. That's why we see in the prayers of Gajendra, it is said that the absolute truth is not only achintya, but beyond material words and concepts also. Namo giram viduraya. So you cannot know him by gira. Gira is the speech. So how it works is, at the root there is experience. Now that experience, in whatever imperfect way is possible, it is put in words, and those words are what we get to read. So now when we read those words, so the materialistic scholars, what they do is they only just read the words and analyze the words. And because the experience cannot be reduced down to words and concepts, in 13th chapter, verses 14 to 18, they are classic examples of achintya bheda bhed in the Bhagavad Gita. So the earlier verses where there was a hint of achintya bheda bhed was given, that was verses 9.4 and 9.5, if you remember. Masthani sarva bhutani nacha matstani bhutani. All beings are situated in me and all beings are not situated in me. So similarly, in the verses 13.14 to 13.18, it is said that he is inside everything, he is outside everything, he is far away, yet he is close by. He has senses, but he is beyond senses. So these are classic statements of achintya bheda bhed. Excuse me. Now, achintya bheda bhed is not just a philosophical conception. It is a spiritual experience. So the point is that achintya bheda bhed is a spiritual experience, of how we are different from the Lord, and yet we are not different from the Lord. Now we can simplistically say that no, we are one in quality but different in quantity, but that is just a basic understanding. So achintya bheda bhed is a much more deep philosophy. We can understand this by analyzing that the Advaita philosophy and the Dvaita philosophy are so deep, and the achintya bheda bhed is the reconciliation of both Dvaita and Advaita. Therefore, it must be very deep. So what we get to read is just like the tip of the iceberg. So, but if we go into the details and then we try to analyze, what are the salient features, how it is different from Dvaita, how it is similar to Dvaita, how it is different from Advaita, and how it is similar to Advaita, we'll find that it is really deep philosophy. So it is a darshan, it is a realized experience of how we are one and different from the Lord. And so who gave the achintya bheda bhed philosophy?
Chaitanya Mahaprabhu.
Yeah. So actually, it's interesting that although the philosophy was given by achintya bheda bhed, by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but he did not coin the term achintya bheda bhed. The first time the achintya bheda bhed, the name of the philosophy was given by Jiva Goswami. So Jiva Goswami is our Siddhanta Acharya. He establishes the Siddhanta of our Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya. So although we have the defining metaphor of our achintya bheda bhed is one is we just read, we just discussed that we are one in quality but different in quantity. The other defining metaphor that is used by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is, which makes a lot of things clear, and we'll see that it appears in the Chaitanya Charitamrita also. It is the metaphor of the sun, the sunlight, and the sun planet, the sun person, the sunlight, and the sun planet. So we compare it with, Bhagwan, Paramatma, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagwan. So now, when we talk about achintya bheda bhed, that can be put into words. But whenever some experiences are put in words, it's a challenge. For example, I can say that I am happy, versus I can say that I'm ecstatic, I'm overjoyed, I'm overwhelmed with happiness. So now all these can convey my feelings to a certain extent, but no one can truly realize my experience. So an experience which is at the level of the subtle mind, even that cannot be conveyed by words. Then what to speak of the spiritual experience? But still the attempt is there. Otherwise, if we say that the spiritual experiences cannot be communicated, then we will not even have a hint of what the spiritual experiences actually are. Therefore, the spiritual experiences are communicated using the material words and material concepts. But when the spiritual experiences are communicated using material words and concepts, the material words and concepts are not in themselves containing the spiritual experiences. They are the way to the experience. So the mundane scholars who resort only to analysis, they may do remarkable analysis and they may have very good analytical minds also. But the actual spiritual experience is beyond the material words and concepts, which is all the which is all that the analysis can reach. So on the other hand, a sadhaka, he may not be able to do that elaborate analysis, but he is applying the process, and the application of the process, it leads to the replication of the experience. So analysis can give us some understanding of the concepts intellectually, but the application gives us the real experience. That's why the important thing in a spiritual path is certainly, we want to study the scriptures exhaustively for our own intellectual conviction. And secondly, Krishna also says that studying scriptures is a way of worshipping me. So we do study, but ultimately the study is meant to create a foundation for the application. And it is not just the study, but the application of the process that will give us the actual experience. So Achintya Bheda Bhed is actually, we can say it's a worldview. It is a darshan, and that is what Krishna concluded with in the last few verses of the 13th chapter. Now, like we use the word achintya, achintya means something that is inconceivable. So we use the word achintya to express concepts that are almost impossible to comprehend. Similarly, the Mayavadis, they also use a similar word, and most of us, I think, maybe aware. We, I think, discussed it once in one of the previous sessions. So they use a similar word that is called as anirvachaniya. So they use anirvachaniya to express concepts that are difficult to comprehend by following their philosophy. But we can say that, okay, are they similar? No, they sound a little similar, but there is a significant difference between the words achintya and anirvachaniya. Now, some scholars, and I'm missing the name of an excellent scholar, he has written a book, and he glorifies Jiva Goswami a lot. He says that he basically analyzes the different scholars who have been there in the past. He also talks about Chanakya Pandit, and he talks about Jiva Goswami, and he says he's the best scholar that have ever appeared in the history of India. So he glorifies him, but he has just one criticism of Jiva Goswami. He says that actually whenever there are some complex concepts that are difficult, Jiva Goswami tries to escape. There is an intellectual escapism, as we call it. He tries to escape intellectually by tagging it as achintya. Achintya means inconceivable. So some people, they say that whenever the Gaudiyas are not able to explain anything, then they call it as achintya. So achintya, basically, they say that it is intellectual escapism used by the Gaudiyas. But there are concepts even in the material realm that cannot be explained. For example, how can you explain that light is both matter and energy? So the point is, when there are concepts in the material realm which cannot be explained or understood completely, then what to speak of the spiritual realm? It is a completely different realm, and for us who are currently in the material realm, how can we fully comprehend it? Like for quantum physics, there are a lot of things in quantum physics that are inconceivable, but still there is a lot of analysis that happens, and also not just analysis, there is also a lot of application that happens of that. Even though they are not able to fully comprehend the quantum physics, but they are able to apply it, and it is working in most cases. So similarly, achintya is not intellectual escapism. There is a lot of reasoning to arrive at achintya, which Jiva Goswami also discusses in his Sandarbhas. So this is a little philosophical, but it is important for us to understand to enter into the 14th chapter, because 14th chapter, again, there are some technical concepts that will come. So let us first understand anirvachaniya. So now we discussed about this briefly when we were discussing 12.1, and some of you may remember it. So Mayavad has two fatal questions. Fatal questions in a sense that they cannot answer those two questions. And there are many such questions, but there are two primary which are very prominent, and they find it very difficult to answer those two questions. Does anyone remember what those two questions are? Prabhupada uses one of that in his purports regularly. Any idea?
Did you say fatal questions?
Fatal, yeah. Fatal in the sense that their philosophy is not able to explain that. Okay, all right. So without spending too much time. So the first question is, does Maya exist in reality or no? And we'll discuss more about it later. But one of the questions that they cannot answer is, does Maya exist in reality or no? And we'll discuss how. If we go into the technical things of their philosophy, then we'll understand how they fail to answer this question. And the other question that they cannot answer is, how can God come under Maya? Their idea is that everyone is God, and if I am God, then how can I come under Maya? Because if God can come under Maya, then Maya becomes God. I am not God, then Maya is God. Prabhupada uses this argument in many of his purports, actually, when he is debating between Dvaita, Advaita, and Achintya Bheda Vaita. So generally, how things work is, we as individuals, we come in contact with many different worldviews. Like, for example, atheism is a worldview, theism is a worldview, Mayavad is also a worldview. And when a person comes in contact with these worldviews, he examines these worldviews and adopts one of these based on what makes the most sense to him. And when he adopts a certain worldview, he stops examining the worldview and starts defending his or her worldview. Whatever the problem in the worldview, I have to prove that this is right. And then what happens? Their further advancement to further knowledge is closed. So in spirituality, there are different paths to go up the spiritual mountain. If we consider spirituality as a mountain, and at the peak we find the absolute truth. So there are different paths to go up the spiritual mountain. So there is a path. So there is a path and there is a purpose of the path. Unfortunately, for many people, the path itself becomes the purpose. So Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, all these are means to acquire knowledge. So, but Prabhupada was so universal. We all are aware about this. He also writes in one of the purports in the 11th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. He says that Jesus Christ, he had so much love for our Guru. So the criteria is how much love for God does one develop. That is how you can evaluate the different spiritual paths. So the point here is that there may be different schools of thought, and there may be individuals who can do a lot of intellectual gymnastics to prove that their school of thought is right. Now, although ultimately it may not be justifiable because the school of thought itself may not be very deep. So in general, Mayavad, in Mayavad, the conception of anirvachaniya is like that. So we discussed this earlier about Vedanta Deshika. He was a very prominent acharya in the Sri Sampradaya. So Vedanta Deshika appeared some generations after Ramanujacharya. So he severely hammers the Mayavad philosophy. So he wrote many books, and he was called as Tarka Ratna. So Tarka means logic, and Ratna means jewel. So he was called as jewel among logicians. So what he said is, okay, if you say that everything in this world is false and only Brahman is real, Ekam Brahma Dvitiya Nasti. So they have this philosophy, Ekam Brahma Dvitiya Nasti. There is just one Brahman that exists. There is nothing else that exists. Then the question comes, now, are scriptures real or are scriptures false? Now, if Brahman is the only reality, but we see so many different things exist. So he doesn't question everything, but at least he questions. Similarly, he also questions if Brahman is the only reality, does Maya exist in reality or it does not exist? Because if we say that, okay, Maya, they say that, okay, we see this duality in this world because of Maya. So his question is, if Maya exists in reality, then your scripture, your philosophy that Ekam Brahma Dvitiya Nasti, there is only one Brahman that exists, there is nothing else that exists, that is lost, because now there are two things, there is Brahman and there is Maya. And if you say that Maya does not exist in reality, then we should not have any perception of duality. Similarly, he says that, okay, if Brahman is all that exists, then tell me whether scriptures exist or scriptures also do not exist. So, they may say that, okay, Bhagwan is false, and ultimately we have to go beyond Bhagwan. But are scriptures real or they are also false? So if scriptures are real, then the scriptures are talking about a person, and how can you deny that? And if you say that scriptures are false, then why are you debating based on scriptures? So now some sections of Mayavad school said that no, some sections of scriptures are false and some are true. Now then he says, how do you decide that? How do you decide which section of scripture is true and which is false? If you want to decide based on what portion of scripture agrees with your philosophy, that is just like torturing the scripture to get what we want from it. just extracting from scripture what we want. So like that, he asks many logical questions. They are just some very prominent questions which the Mayavadis are not able to answer. But like that, he has he has written a book, and I have a copy of it. Shatadusha. I'm missing the name, but it's a very nice book. So similarly, he asked, does Maya exist in reality or it does not exist? Because the Mayavadis say that there is only one Brahman that exists. So if Maya is false, then I should already be understanding that I am that all-pervading Brahman. And obviously, we don't feel ourselves as the all-pervading Brahman. And if Maya is true, then there is a second truth that is separate from Brahman. And then your idea that Brahman is the only reality is lost. So what the Mayavadis say is that Maya is anirvachaniya. It is indescribably simultaneously existent and non-existent. It's a very technical and a difficult concept, this anirvachaniya, and we'll see how it is different from achintya. So now, how it is different from achintya? So achintya accepts scriptures to be true, whereas anirvachaniya considers scriptures to be provisionally true. That means as long as it agrees with our philosophy, it is true. That is the concept of anirvachaniya. Now, what achintya says is that there are statements in the scriptures that say that we are one with God. And there are numerous statements that say we are different from God. And that is why scriptures say that we have to worship God. Now, Jiva Goswami says that all these statements have to be considered as true. Then how can we be one with God and how can we be different from God? He says that because the scriptures say that, we have to accept it. But how it is so, we cannot realize it at our stage. When we make spiritual advancement, when we come to the level of consciousness on which the compiler of the scripture is, then we will understand it. Whereas anirvachaniya, it doesn't say that scripture is true. It says first our philosophy is true. And when you have accepted that our philosophy, which is Mayavad, is true, and when there is a logical problem with it, the logical problem is whether Maya is true or false, then they say that Maya is undescribable, anirvachaniya. So this anirvachaniya, undescribable, is about description, whether Maya exists or not. Excuse me. They say we can't describe it. So undescribable refers to inability to explain in words. But once they create this category, they say that our existence is also anirvachaniya. This world is also anirvachaniya. Our relationships are also anirvachaniya. So it is one thing to say that something is not knowable, and it is completely another thing to make not knowable into a category of existence. Not knowable is just our inability to know. It is not a category of existence. So matter is a category of existence and spirit is a category of existence. But not knowable is not a category of existence. So what happens is they define Maya as anirvachaniya, and then they put all of the existence in the category of anirvachaniya. So achintya resolves a scriptural paradox. Paradoxes, as we had discussed earlier, are contradictory sounding statements which are conveying a higher truth. So achintya resolves a scriptural paradox by saying, yes, both kind of statements are there, but both are true. And how? That we will have to advance to realize. When we advance, then we'll be able to realize. But what achintya does is it evades a logical problem. And what is the logical problem? Is Maya real or false? And the biggest problem is it creates a new non-scriptural category of existence. In the scripture, you will not find any word anirvachaniya, and you won't find any other category of existence besides spiritual existence and material existence. So what do we mean by category of existence? Like, for example, we say that soul exists, but why can't we tangibly perceive the existence of soul? Because we have material senses and the soul is spiritual. Another example is by the design argument, we can infer that God exists. But by the design argument, we cannot conceive that God is a bluish, blackish boy playing a flute and herding his cows. For that, we need a revelation. So we can tangibly perceive the material reality, and we need revelation to conceive of spiritual truths. So the nature of spiritual reality cannot be conceived. That is inconceivable. So achintya is used to express the limitation of human faculty, whereas anirvachaniya is used to hide a logical flaw of the philosophy of Mayavad. So coming back to chapter 14, now what is the connection between the 13th and the 14th chapter? In the 24th verse of the 13th chapter, Krishna said, so the verse was, Ye evam vaikti purusham prakritim cha gunai saha. One who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature, no, he will surely attain liberation. So these are the three things he said. The person has to understand the material nature, which is prakriti, the living entity, which is jiva, and the interaction of the modes of nature, gunas. No, one who understands these three things, he will attain liberation. So Krishna has talked about prakriti and purusha, but he has not talked about gunas so far. So even without Arjuna prompting anything, Krishna starts speaking about the gunas. And Krishna is eager that Arjuna, and through Arjuna, all of us also attain liberation. So in this verse 14.1, Krishna says, Param bhuyaha pravakshyami. So the word bhuya, this came, at least this is coming for the second time. Bhuya means again. So if you remember, it came in the 10th chapter also. Bhuya eva mahabaho shunu me paramam vachaha. So that is how the 10th chapter starts. 10.1, Bhuya eva mahabaho shunu me paramam vachaha. So the word bhuya can mean again. It can also mean further. So if we take it to mean again, it means Krishna will talk again. So what will he talk again? The supremacy of bhakti, which is talked about repeatedly. He's going to talk about it again. In the previous chapter, he talked about supremacy of bhakti by talking about how Gyan leads to bhakti. Now, how Gyan can be assimilated and realized only through bhakti. So in the last chapter, Gyan was talked about by talking about relationship between Jiva and Paramatma. Now here Gyan is talked about in terms of relationship between Jivas and Gunas in the 14th chapter, And how this also glorifies bhakti. This is what Krishna is saying here. So Krishna is saying, again, I'm going to talk about bhakti. So if you remember in the 13th chapter, which we already discussed multiple times, that 13th chapter is like the heart of the Jnana section. 3 times Krishna has talked about the glory of bhakti in the hardcore Jnana section. And we'll see again in the 14th chapter, Krishna is going to talk about the glory of bhakti twice in the 14th chapter, which is significant. In the 13th chapter, there were 35 verses in which 3 times Krishna talks about bhakti. In the 14th chapter, there are 27 verses, and 2 times Krishna is going to talk about bhakti in the 14th chapter. So again, coming back here, bhuya can also mean further. Further in the sense, Krishna has talked about his supreme position, but now he will talk about his supreme position in terms of how he is the controller of the 3 modes. So Jnananam Jnanam Uttamam. So in both ways, it is Uttam Jnana, Jnana of Bhagwan and Jnana of Bhakti, and it will lead to liberation. So this is what Prabhupada is also saying in his purport. So I take a quick pause here and see if there are any questions or comments about what we have discussed so far. Any comments, questions?
Yeah, that was pretty heavy philosophical explanations. But you spoke about in Advaita how Maya is perceived. But I just want to make a comment that in our philosophy, Maya is perceived as the illusory energy of Krishna that eternally exists, right?
Right.
And it's hard to overcome until we surrender to Lord Krishna. Then it is, because it's his energy, she that facilitates our devotion to Krishna.
Absolutely.
So I just wanted to make that comment, the difference between that philosophy and our philosophy.
Yeah, the problem with Advaita is they don't accept Bhagwan, first of all. That Bhagwan is also something, you have to go beyond Bhagwan also. That is their idea. Bhagwan is a product of matter. The personality of Bhagwan, that is a product of Maya. So if you don't accept Bhagwan, then it is very difficult to accept his energies only. We understand Bhagwan, and then we understand that, okay, Brahman is the effulgence.
That's why they're not sure if it exists or doesn't exist, because they're not sure if Bhagwan exists or doesn't exist.
But we see in the Bhagavad Gita 7th chapter, Krishna speaks elaborately about Maya, Twice or thrice he talks about Maya.
That it is my
energy,
and it is very difficult to overcome also, he says.
Right. And then Mama Maya Duratya, and then he also says that the material energy which consists of the 3 modes of material nature. So he also talks about there itself.
The moment you surrender to him, then she, takes a facilitating position.
Exactly. So to accept that the Maya is the energy of God, you have to first accept God as a person, and then you can.
Right.
So. Yeah. Go ahead, Mataji, you had a comment?
Hare Krishna.
Yes, Mataji.
Yes, this world is all Maya. Everything is Maya. So that's what I think is everything is Maya, and we have to get over Maya to get to Krishna. Isn't that true?
So the way Krishna describes Maya he defines Maya in the Bhagavatam, there is a definition of Maya that is given by Lord Vishnu. There is a discussion that happens between Lord Brahma and Lord Vishnu.
Mm-hmm.
So he says there that, O Brahma, to see things disconnected from me in this world is the source of Maya. He says that if you see anything that is of any value, you see any tangible thing that is of any value, and if you don't realize the connection of that thing with me, with Krishna or Vishnu, then that will lead you to Maya. But if you realize that everything is coming from Krishna or Vishnu, and ultimately everything is to be used in his service, then it will not lead to Maya. So similarly, we see, there is in the Ramayana itself, we see that Lakshmi Devi, who is Sita Mata, she is Lakshmi herself. But what Ravana wanted to do is he wanted to enjoy Lakshmi without God, without Vishnu. So that leads, to his destruction. So because he was seeing Lakshmi disconnected from Vishnu, and when he wanted to enjoy Lakshmi, separate from Vishnu, that led to his destruction. So that Lakshmi, who is all auspicious, that became the source of Maya for Ravan. So even Lakshmi Devi, if you see her disconnected from the Supreme Lord, then that will give rise to Maya, and that will ultimately destroy us. So that is a very it's a very important lesson that comes out from Ramayana also.
In simple terms, if we use if you have money, if we use our money for our sense gratification, that is Maya. But if you use that same money for Krishna's service, then that is that is not Maya. Yeah, that's beyond Maya, exactly. So anything in this world can be, if it's used for our personal sense gratification, that is considered Maya. But if that same thing dovetailed into Krishna's service becomes devotional service, beyond Maya.
So that way we cannot say that this world is false.
Right.
This world is not, it is temporary, but this world also exists. And we say, we see that in the last chapter also Krishna had said that, even Prakriti is eternal, it's not temporary. What happens is the manifestation of Prakriti that happens, so when Prakriti is in an unmanifest state, it exists as, the Pradhan, as we call it. So, but Prakriti is eternal. It may exist in some other form, but it exists eternally.
Right. It's not false. It's not false. It is eternal.
It's not false. It is eternal.
But at the same time, anything, even education, even getting a PhD, that we in this for our own personal gain that we do, we cannot. That's temporary, like you said. We cannot take it with us even into a next life. Whereas devotional service, we can take it with us even into a next life, even if we are not completely fulfilled in the path of devotional service. So in that sense, that is not temporary, but
but we do say that this life is like an illusion, and that is said in because not that this life does not exist, or we do not exist actually, or you do not exist actually. That is said because this life goes like a flash, it is temporary, and that is why it is compared to as a dream. What happened 1 year back in my life, now it seems like a dream. It's first of all, it is very difficult for me to recollect everything that might have happened 1 year back in my life, and even if I have some vague recollection, it basically feels like a dream. So this whole life passes as a flash, and we won't even realize how the life has passed. And because it is temporary, sometimes it is called as in that sense it may be called as a dream, as an illusion. Actually it is not illusion.
Illusion is Maya. Illusion is Maya.
But it's a difficult concept to comprehend. I think one time Radhanath Maharaj and Niranjan Maharaj were giving a dual lecture together, and Niranjan Maharaj was explaining that how our life is a daydream, and especially if you're not serving Krishna. And, it's not that different from our night dream, But Radhanath Maharaj concluded very nicely saying, yes, it is a daydream, but at the same time, the Atma, which is eternal, is experiencing it. So in that sense, so we can't say if someone is hurting or someone is in joyous or sorrow, you still need to acknowledge that because the Atma is experiencing it. So we need to feel for each other, even though it's illusion. Like, the worst thing that can happen is someone in your family dies or something like that. That is we can tell them, oh, it's just an illusion, that it's not, that this is just a daydream. This is all part of life, But at the same time, the Atma is experiencing that pain. So in that sense, we have to acknowledge that it is, in one sense, a reality because the Atma is experiencing it.
Okay, any other comments or questions?
Thank you, Prabhuji. And
Thank you, Mataji.
have a nice night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Any other questions or comments about what we discussed today so far? Okay, so we still have 10 minutes. Maybe we can then we can take up the next verse. I'll share my screen. Okay, is everyone able to see my screen? Okay, so let's just we'll just recite it once and then we'll go to the translation and the purport. So you can repeat after me. Idam jnanam upashritya
Idam jnanam upashritya
mamsa dharmayam agatah
mama sadharmayam agataha
sargepi nupajayante
sargepi nopajayante
pralayena vyathanti cha.
pralayena vyatanti cha.
By becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can attain to the transcendental nature like my own. Thus established, one is not born at the time of creation or disturbed at the time of dissolution. Purport: after acquiring perfect transcendental knowledge, one acquires qualitative equality with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, becoming free from the repetition of birth and death. One does not, however, lose his identity as an individual soul. It is understood from Vedic literature that the liberated souls who have reached the transcendental planets of the spiritual sky always look to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, being engaged in his transcendental loving service. So even after liberation, the devotees do not lose their individual identities. Generally, in the material world, whatever knowledge we get is contaminated by the three modes of material nature. Knowledge which is not contaminated by the three modes of nature is called transcendental knowledge. As soon as one is situated in that transcendental knowledge, he is on the same platform as the Supreme Person. Those who have no knowledge of the spiritual sky hold that after being freed from the material activities of the material form, this spiritual identity becomes formless, without any varietedness. However, just as there is material varietedness in this world, in the spiritual world, there is also varietedness. Those in ignorance of this think that spiritual existence is opposed to material variety. But actually, in the spiritual sky, one attains a spiritual form. There are spiritual activities, and the spiritual situation is called devotional life. That atmosphere is said to be uncontaminated, and there one is equal in quality with the Supreme Lord. To obtain such knowledge, one must develop all the spiritual qualities. One who thus develops the spiritual qualities is not affected either by the creation or by the destruction of the material world. So very significant, Krishna is not saying here that by studying this knowledge you will attain liberation. He is saying that idam jnanam upashritya. Upashritya is like taking shelter of this knowledge. So we have to take shelter, not just study this knowledge. So we were discussing how the scholars, what they do is they only analyze the words of the scriptures. For them, scripture is like it's like a fossil that is to be studied. They have not even an intention to live the scripture. But when the devotees, they study the scripture, they want to live the scripture. It's not just a fossil for them that they just want to study it, in a sense that just study it, analyze it, and then leave it alone. It's not like that. So Krishna is very clearly saying, take shelter of this knowledge. And what knowledge? He is going to give that knowledge here in this chapter. So and what will happen, what will be the consequence of taking shelter of this knowledge? He's saying one can attain to the transcendental nature like my own. Basically, he will be freed from the material conception and he will be transferred to the spiritual reality. Thus established, one is not born at the time of creation or disturbed at the time of dissolution. So in the next verses, Krishna is going to talk about what happens at the time of creation, how the souls are ingested into the material universe. All those discussion is going to come now in the 14th chapter. So therefore, he is giving a hint that thus established, one is not born at the time of creation. So because he is freed from the material reality, he is going back to the spiritual reality, and he will also not be disturbed at the time of dissolution. So we can understand how important this knowledge is. And Prabhupada has already mentioned in the previous purport that in this chapter Krishna is going to give much better knowledge that was given, or much higher knowledge that was given in the previous chapters. And Prabhupada also said that if whoever understands this knowledge, in the last purport he said, whoever understands the knowledge given in the 14th chapter, he will be liberated. So Krishna is eager that Arjuna is liberated, and through Arjuna all of us are also liberated. And even Prabhupada is also very eager that we understand this clearly, what is being described. So the three modes of material nature, which are material, obviously, they will be described, and then there will be transcendental qualities also that needs to be developed, and those will also be described here. So we'll see when we get to those verses. So I'll stop here. Are there any questions or comments about what we discussed?
So you said we need to practice the scripture, but how do you overcome some difficulties in practicing the scripture? Like we have discussed before, there are sadhana siddhas, kripa siddhas, and nitya siddhas. So sadhana siddha is trying to practice it perfectly, right?
Right. So actually, there could be many ways, Mataji, to overcome the difficulties that we find in practicing what is mentioned in the scriptures. So the first and the most important thing is association of devotees. Some people say that I can only just by hearing from Guru we will be able to overcome all the difficulties. That may be true, but we also have to see how other devotees are. It is not that the difficulties that we are facing are only specific to us. They are exclusively, they apply to us. There are other devotees also who have gone through the similar situation. Most of us kind of face similar problems. So we can also learn from each other. Association is very important.
Yeah, I fully agree. Yeah. Without association, it's very hard to. In fact, Prabhupada says that. Exactly. In the Bhagavad Gita, he says, without association, it is very difficult to make progress. He says that.
Right. And when we take our problems to our guru or some sadhus, like some elevated spiritual personality, they can give us the spiritual principles that can be applied. But how it is to be applied, when we see people applying those principles in their life, by that I'm talking about other people who are in similar condition like us. All of us are grahasthas. So how other people are applying those spiritual principles in their day-to-day life and trying to overcome the problems that they are facing, then it also gives us the confidence that yes, I can also overcome. If so many people can overcome these problems, then I can also overcome this. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, from imperfection, perfection arises. So we have to keep practicing, and we have to take association of the devotees and see how they are living their life. And we also help each other in different ways. So we have our spiritual mentors. There are senior devotees who can guide us. So we don't have to take all of our problems to our guru. There are other mentors available. So yeah, this in fact is I have heard that there is a significant difference between ISKCON and Gaudiya Math. Although the philosophy is almost similar, it might be just maybe 1 or 2% or 3% here and there. The philosophy might be, but what I have heard is that the society of ISKCON is flourishing much more than the society of Gaudiya Vaishnavas in the Gaudiya Math. So there, what I learned from the devotees is that the people come to the philosophy, but very more than often they don't stick to the principles. They fall down, and the reason that I have found out is they don't have as much spiritual association, as much spiritual guidance available from spiritual mentors. So they might have their gurus who must be excellent devotees, pure Vaishnavas, but how much those pure Vaishnavas are accessible to them and how many times they're accessible. They have their own things to take care, they have their own responsibilities, they travel. And because they don't have much association, much guidance from senior Vaishnavas. So like for example, in India, we have the counselor-counselee system. So in the counselor actually also helps the counselee in different ways, whatever day-to-day life, the problems that the counselee might be facing in practicing bhakti. Now, those problems also the counselee first take it to the counselor, and the counselor tries to resolve it at his level, and then if he is not able to resolve, then it goes to the next level, like that. So just having association of just by thinking that if I just have hear from my guru, I will be able to do it. I think that that is important, but also we have to have very close Vaishnava association, and then that way we will be able to
Yeah, and even without the counselor-counselee, hierarchy, which we don't have in the US in all places,
right.
Still association of devotees makes a difference, just
Exactly.
the association of devotees and getting some guidance from, every now and then in your difficult situations in life. Even
Right.
just that amount makes a big difference, that through association.
Exactly. So, but yeah, I mean, there could be various other ways. We have the whole process is there, that is called Anartha Nivritti is one of the stages in the in the in the 9 stages that I talked about in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So, and I would assume what you're talking about is more at the stage of Anartha Nivritti. So Anartha Nivritti, until we come to, so we have Adu Shraddha and then Bhajan Kriya, Sadhu Sangha, Anartha Nivritti and Artha Pravritti. So Anartha Nivritti is like a steep, steep uphill like this. And somehow we have to struggle to get here. But once we have crossed this Anartha Nivritti state, then it is the plateau kinds of flatten off. It becomes like this, and then we can easily walk through the rest of the stages. So what is the way it is described to the devotees is this Anartha Nivritti, passing through the Anartha Nivritti phase is very important. It is the possibly the most difficult phase. Many people fall down from this phase itself. So, but once you have crossed this Anartha Nivritti phase, then it kind of flattens off, and then it is a little easier.
But what does the Anartha Nivritti phase constitute of?
No, basically we have the anarthas in our heart, right? So we have to cleanse our heart of those anarthas. So conditionings, as we call it, we have so many different conditionings. So as we were discussing, right, for a sadhaka, there are 2 struggles. One is to detach himself from the material, material reality, and the other is to fix his consciousness on the spiritual reality. So these are the 2 struggles. But there are anarthas in the heart, the conditioning that stops us from, from these 2 things. So clearing those anartha nivritti, those anarthas from our heart is very important. Cheto darpana marjana, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also says that chanting the holy name, gradually our heart will be cleansed. But that chanting has
the
to
main
be
ones being like pride and envy or something like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, pride, envy, lust, anger, greed, those are there, but then there are some other complex compounds which are mixture of these. So each of us would know what are our problems. So, and for each of us, it may take more or less time to cross this phase depending on how deep our conditioning is. But yeah, but what you said is right. Those are the essential elements that give rise to other complex problems. So,
but that is where chanting of the holy name sincerely
Exactly.
comes also, where the kripa comes
Right.
in. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So we are past 8. Pyaripu Jiyamata, you have any comments? Okay, looks like they are not there. So thank you everyone. Thanks for joining. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Anta Krishna Vaishnava Ki Jai.